if you only love those who are quote unquote worthy of your love, then how are you any different than the tax collector? How are you any different than the unbeliever? How are you any different from the pagan, right? When it comes to Christian unity, the action is love, and that love transcends societal boundaries. It moves past what the world would expect. That means I am looking to love, and again, this is the action of love. I'm looking to love those whom I don't, quote unquote, get along with. I'm looking to love those who I am, quote unquote, annoyed with. I'm looking to love those who I don't know how to have a conversation with because you're older than I am and you speak a different language than I do. I am looking to transcend the age gap, and so even if you're young and you're wearing clothes that I don't understand, I'm going to talk to you, right? This is the unity that the Bible is talking about. You're showing love to your brothers and sisters, regardless of their background, regardless of how they speak, what they look like. It is an action. At the same time, this Christian unity fleshes itself out with the purpose of glorifying God, with the purpose of vindicating the gospel, with the purpose of displaying what the gospel actually does. This goes back to Ephesians 2, right? When we're talking about what the gospel does and bringing the Jew and Gentile together, the purpose of pursuing Christian unity is to display the gospel. Make sense? The purpose of loving those who are unlovable is to display the gospel. The purpose of trying to build relationships with those who are of different ages than you is to display the gospel. The purpose of talking and building relationships with those who speak different languages than you, serving them, is to display the gospel. That is the purpose behind Christian unity. Now, the source of Christian unity is the love of Christ. We love because he first loved us, correct? Make sense? We do these things because Christ first loved us. That's the source of our unity. Love that is supernatural. It is love that can be only explained because we know what love looks like, because God has shown us what love looks like. So we do this, we practice this, we pursue Christian unity because God has loved us first. In Luke chapter 7, Jesus says something fun. Turn with me there, Luke 7. Who's the last person to read, Irene? Luke 7, verse 47. He who's been forgiven little loves little. That's one of those verses that I like to read when I want to feel bad about myself. It's convicting, isn't it? How can I, as a believer, how can I, as a Christian, how can I, as a pastor, not want to pursue love, not want to pursue unity, not want to pursue relationships with other people in this church when I have been forgiven of so much? What justification do I have for that, right? It's one of those verses that does that to you, and you understand that the reason why you are able to pursue Christian unity, biblical unity, is because Christ has shown us what that love looks like. How different was Christ from us? How completely opposite was Christ from us? Human, and that's pretty much where my similarities with Christ change. That's it. We were both human, but Christ was sinless. I was sinful. Christ loved people. I love myself. Christ served. He came not to be served, but to serve. My natural tendency, I want people to serve me, right? And yet with that huge gap, with that difference, Christ still dies on a cross on my behalf to bring us into his family, right? So again, when we talk about this pursuing of Christian unity. Yes, the action in and of itself is love, loving your brothers and sisters. Yes, the purpose of that is to display the gospel. But the source, the reason why you know what to do, the reason why you're able to do this sort of unity is because Christ has loved you. And you know what that looks like. That's why you can pursue in love the person who might just come from the street. Doesn't smell that nice. That's why you can pursue in love that guy that joins the fellowship and you know what, his jokes aren't really that funny. Right? That's why you can pursue in love that woman who has a really, really checkered past. Right? That's what Christian unity is supposed to be. Fourthly, the context of Christian unity. The context of Christian unity is primarily the local church. Okay, you're not going to be able to display Christian unity that well if you are a Lone Ranger Christian. Who are you united with? Myself. I get along with me. There are zero conflicts. You know, we don't argue with each other because I get to make all the decisions. You know, I go to church when I want. I get Starbucks in the middle of my devotion because I can do that. And there's no argument, right? The place where Christian unity most clearly works itself out is in the context of the local church. When you are rubbing shoulders with other sinners. You're only going to be able to practice this sort of love when you are confronted and when you are placed in a position where you have to talk to other people and build relationships with other people. And you realize that people are different. Not everybody thinks as brilliantly as you do, right? You're going to realize that within the context of the local church, there are plenty of sinners. I am a sinner. And so when we talk about what biblical and Christian unity is, we understand that the action of it is loving. And we understand that the purpose of it is to display the gospel. And we realize that the reason why we can do that, the source of it, is the love of Christ for us. But the context in which we practice it has to be here. Has to be here, within the context of the local church. It's the primary place you're going to be able to do it elsewhere. Full disclosure, you can meet other Christians elsewhere. You can serve in some sort of school Christian club, maybe some sort of parachurch ministry, and you'll be able to exercise unity in those places. But I want you to understand that the primary, most specific, most consistent place for you to be challenged and to practice this and live this out is going to be in the local church. Make sense? Any questions with that so far? I have a thing on my notes that says ask for questions. So, no? All right, okay. What is at stake? What happens when we don't practice Christian unity? When we don't do this? What is at stake? What is Matthew 28, 18 to 20? Do you guys know? You can't start in the... What is it called? What is it called? What's its popular? The Great Commission, right? The Great Commission is to make disciples. Great Commission is to make disciples, and part of making disciples is evangelism, and it's baptism, and it is teaching them to obey all the commandments of God. And so when we talk about what is at stake with Christian unity, I want to point at two different things. What is at stake is biblical evangelism, and what is at stake is biblical discipleship. If we do not practice Christian unity, we compromise evangelism and we compromise discipleship. Okay? Does that make sense so far? Are we tracking with that argument? When it comes to evangelism, Jesus' words in John 13 are important for us to think about. So turn with me to John 13, and let's get a popcorn for that. I'll get your verse in a second. You want to read all of it? One second, Amy, sorry. verses 33 to 35, please. Mm. Mm. How will they know that we are his disciples? How will they know that we practice what we preach? If you have love for one another, right? It's one of those challenging verses again. This is love with the depth of the cross, love that marks believers as followers of Christ. This is a costly love. This is a God-exalting love. This is a supernatural love for one another. This is what it's supposed to be. And one of the things you're going to understand, one of the things you're going to recognize is that when we talk about Christian unity, and when we talk about community in general, you're going to find all different kinds of communities out there that know how to love one another, or at least know how to get along. If you've ever seen a group of Alcoholics Anonymous people, they can get along with one another. They can show favoritism. They know how to spend time with each other and support one another. I've had times even within this church where I've talked to people and they said, you know what, I remember what unity was like with my old group of friends in the world, and they seem to love me better than the people here. Right? You can find quote unquote love in other communities. And so understand that when we talk about biblical love and when we talk about biblical unity, this has to be something supernatural. This has to be something you work at. Has to be something that you yourself are committed to. Because otherwise, how is anyone going to know that you are actually practicing what you preach? That when you talk about how Christ has saved you, it has actually affected your life so that you know how to love people. Right? This is to proclaim or to assert that you are a Christian and to not love one another. It's kind of like doing the show and tell without the show. You stand up in front of the class and you know this is my pet dog, my favorite dog. He does tricks. There he is. And there's nothing there, right? It's like saying, Jesus has saved me, now I am free, and you know what? I've got nothing to show for it. That's not what you want. It's not what we want as PCC. When we talk about evangelism, when you tell people about who Jesus is, it's got to be backed up by what they see within these walls and the relationships we have with one another. Does that make sense? That is what is at stake. If we're not pursuing Christian unity, what is at stake is your gospel witness. Because they're going to say, okay, you love Jesus, but your church looks divided all over the place. Nobody gets along. People show up on Sunday and they leave right out the door. My Roman Catholic church does that. I do that with my family, right? It's not what you want. It's not what we want. That's number one at stake, evangelism. Number two at stake is your discipleship. Take a look with me at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 14. Ephesians 4, verse 14. And Amy, you can popcorn someone for that. Can you read that next verse? Awesome. Thank you, sir. I think you look at verses 14 and 15 and you realize this is something we want. And it's something we want for PCC. This is something that I think we want for one another, that we grow up into Christ. We grow up into Him who is the head, that we don't act as those who are tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine. We're not just chasing the latest Christian fad, but instead that we are Christian saints, mature Christian saints who love Jesus and proclaim it with all our hearts. I think that is something that we want for one another. We want a church that has a body of believers standing firm in our obedience to Christ. And frankly, as we look to stand for Christ, one of the things you also know is that there is false doctrine, there is false teaching, there are accusers, there are deceivers all over the place. And so if we are going to stand firm in the gospel as a church, we're going to have to learn how to disciple one another. We're going to have to learn how to support one another, encourage and edify one another. We're going to have to learn how to praise that which is good and to admonish that which is sinful. We're going to have to learn how to do those things. Now, if there's no Christian unity within the church, how does that discipleship occur? It won't. Paul talks about the unity of the faith. Chapter 4, verse 7. To each one of us grace was given according to the measure of Christ's gift. Verse 11, he gave some as apostles and some as prophets and some as evangelists and some as pastors and teachers. Verse 13, until we all attain to the unity of faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. He's talking about the way that the local church interacts with each other. He's talking about how we learn how to build one another up. You'll notice that there is not a single individual Christian that has all the spiritual gifts. There's a reason why we have to be members of a body, because there are some people who are simply just more compassionate than I am. There are people who know how to enunciate the gospel better than I do. There are people who are more bold. There are people who come from different backgrounds and are able to explain the gospel from a different context better than I could ever. There are people who know how to serve and show mercy better than I know how. And as a church, we are able to strengthen our testimony because we are able to love one another, because we're able to point to one another and grow from one another, encourage one another. Without church unity, without biblical unity, that all falls apart. And now you're that individual, you're by yourself saying, you know what, I'm going to learn how to evangelize by myself. I'm going to learn how to proclaim the gospel by myself. I'm going to teach by myself, even if I have no students. You can't work out the Christian life by yourself. I'm going to show mercy, and I'm still just by myself. Who am I showing mercy to? Doesn't make sense. I'm going to be that individual that knows how to give, but I'm giving to myself. So, again, none of that makes sense. And so again, what is at stake with biblical unity is our ability to disciple one another. I think at this point I want to direct your attention to the church covenant, or at least talk about that a little bit. We want to have a church that is united, right? We want to have a church that is united in its breadth. We want to have a church that is united in its depth. United because it doesn't matter what our background or our history is. We are united because of the gospel and brought into one family, one man. And united because not by our similarities, but united precisely because of who Christ is and what he's done for us. There's a depth to that. And at the same time, we've been talking about what is at stake with this unity, and what is at stake with this unity is discipleship. And the purpose of the covenant is to give us all an understanding of what that life looks like, of what we want to promote when it comes to Christianity. What's not going to happen is this. What's not going to happen is the pastor's going to find out you broke the church covenant and kick you out immediately. What's not going to happen is that, oh, you were drinking? Okay, well, excommunicated immediately. If you look at the church covenant, I don't think there's a single one of us who's done all of those things perfectly at all times. But the purpose of the church covenant gives us something that we understand. This is what we're looking at. This is what we want to promote. This is how we're going to disciple one another. This is how we're going to encourage one another. We want to be on the same page so that there's a unity in what we're promoting. That's the idea behind the covenant. What we don't want to have happen is have a church that is looking to build ourselves up in multiple different ways, promote many different things, believe all kinds of sort of things so that we have an organizational unity because we all say we're from PCC. It's not what we're looking for. We want to have this very particular goal in mind of honoring God and promoting the true gospel. We want to have this very particular mind of loving other people and building other people up in the faith. And so, with that said, that's why we look to have the covenant within our church. The covenant doesn't mark you out as a Christian. It doesn't mark you out as a believer versus an unbeliever. It doesn't mark you out as faithful versus unfaithful. It simply says that if you're a member of this church, these are the things you're looking to promote for the good of the other brothers and sisters at PCC. And if that's not something that you want to agree to, that's fine. Serve in a church that you can gladly get on board with the direction of the church. I don't know. I've heard a number of things with regard to the church covenant that have concerned me. And I just want to reiterate to all of us here, church covenant doesn't make you a Christian. Church covenant doesn't separate the good Christian from the bad Christian. This is simply how we want to disciple one another. This is simply the goal of our church and the direction that our church wants to move towards. And so, if you want to be a part of that, let us know. And if you don't want to be a part of that, more love to you. Let us help you find another church where you can serve well. Does that make sense? I've got nothing else. And so I like to end lessons with the really heavy stuff. So any questions, comments, concerns with regard to anything in the realm of Christian unity? Next week we talk about Christian diversity and what the differences are and what that can look like within a church. But this is what unity is. This is what we're pursuing. No, we're all just okay? Really? I thought that last thing would have opened up all kinds of questions. I guess not. Oh, they're not here. All right. Well, if there's no questions, again, you're free to talk to me after this or at any time. But we'll go ahead and close in prayer, and we have lunch after this. All right. Alj, you want to do the honors, please? Thank you.